Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Seth Parnell, minister of the Portia Church of Christ, and this is episode 94 of the Midweek Bible Study. We're in the mid-90s. We're getting up there. So good to have you here. Hope that you are doing well. Hope things are going your way. Hope you're prepared for that snow that we're supposed to get tomorrow. It says that we're going to maybe get a little bit of winter weather, and so hope that if you're traveling, hope you stay safe. Hope you stay cautious while you're driving out there on the roads. But I don't think it's supposed to be too bad. But you never know with Arkansas. It can go either which way, with our weather. And so it's just we want to let you know that we're glad that you're here, whether you're watching now or later on. We appreciate your presence, and we hope this does you some good. Always feel free to drop us some suggestions for future episodes, or to give us suggestions for topics, or if you have any questions, so please feel free to get in contact with us. We love to explain or to flesh out any misunderstandings, or if you have any questions about what we further study, then please get with us. We would love to hear from you. And we always want to extend you an invitation if you are in the Portia area. You should come see us sometime. And we are meeting right now at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, 10 o'clock for Bible class, and 11 o'clock for worship service. And Sunday nights and Wednesday nights, they're at 6 o'clock. And so whether you're around here in the morning or in the evening on one of those days, we hope you can come see us. We hope that you can drop by. We'd love to see you. We'd love to worship with you and to talk with you. We are located at 307 South Jackson Street in Portia, Arkansas. And so if you get a chance, you come by and see us. Like I said, we would love to see you. It's good to have the Tillemans here. It's good to have you guys here. I hope things are doing good up there in Ravenden. Hope things are going well for you guys. And we got the Hudsons are here. It says they're watching and say you're looking good. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I very much appreciate that. It's good to have you guys here. Hope things are going well up your way, up north. We appreciate you dropping by every week. And we got the Dunlaps here as well. It's good to have you guys. Hope things are going good with you as well. And these are some of the biggest supporters of the show here. And so we appreciate you guys being here. Tonight we are going to take a look at Daniel chapter 5. Daniel chapter 5 is an interesting chapter when you look at its place here in the Bible. We know that Daniel is it's kind of a unique book here in the Old Testament, because most of us are pretty familiar with with the first couple of chapters, we're familiar with stories such as, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We're familiar with, Daniel in the lion's den. Some of us are familiar with, Nebuchadnezzar and how he was humbled, before God. But the last half of the book usually we aren't as familiar with because it has to do with a lot of prophecy, has a little bit harder reading. It's different than the narrative style that we read about in the early parts of the book. But in Daniel chapter 5, we're still in the early part of the book, and we are things are kind of winding down, and there's going to be a big change that takes place in the kind of the global powers of the world. The people who are in charge of the world powers, it's going to change, throughout, this chapter, and somebody new is going to be, taking over. Like I said, there's a lot of people who had, power, who had a lot of authority, at one point. We know that, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the people of Assyria, the Romans, all these people, they had, an immense amount of power and influence over the world at one time. But one thing that is, across the board that they have in common is they all fell. They all eventually lost that power, because that's the way this thing works. No one can stay in power, for forever. And this is going to be true for the Babylonian Empire as well. As we're going to see, if you remember, they were the country that took Israel into exile. They were the country that took over Judah, and they ransacked it, and they raided it, and they carried off all of the useful people into captivity. And so that's where when we read about Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these individuals had been carried off into captivity, and this is where we find them being servants in Babylon. It's good to have Carlene here. It's good to have you here. I hope things are going well over your way as well. We appreciate you stopping by. But but Daniel, he's going to play a role in this story as well. But if you take a look here at Daniel chapter 5, we're going to read a couple of verses here to see just what happens in particular with this story and the handwriting on the wall, as it's a common phrase that we still use even today. You think about it, sometimes if something is somebody foresaw something coming, or if they could predict something that was happening, they might say, well, I saw the writing on the wall. And that's a phraseology that we use that kind of goes back to this story and that we read. And it's good to have Sarah Whaley here. It's good to have you guys here. I hope things are going good over your way as well. It's good to hear from you. But this handwriting on the wall is something that is pretty memorable in the book of Daniel. But look here in verse 1 here. It says, King Belshazzar made a great feast for thousands of his lords, and drank wine in front of 1,000. Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and of silver that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem, and be brought, that the king and his lords and his wives and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple and the house of God in Jerusalem. And the king and his lords and his wives and his concubines drank from them. And they drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. And immediately a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, opposite the lampstand. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. And then the king's color changed, and his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together. And the king called loudly to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers. And the king declared to the wise men of Babylon, Whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple, and have a chain of gold around his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then all the king's wise men came in, that they could not read the writing, or make known to the king the interpretation. The king Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his color changed, and his lords were perplexed. We have here this story which recounts this mysterious happening during a feast. This King Belshazzar, he is kind of living it up. He's someone who's having this grand party. Him and his lords, and they're drinking and they're doing all sorts of stuff here, having a grand old time. Here with this party that they have thrown. And an interesting thing when you take a look at the history, of what goes on, here, it's kind of an odd time before a party because the armies of the Medes and the Persians have already taken the vast majority of Babylonian territory, and they have closed in on the city of Babylon itself. And while the city of Babylon was noted for its great defense, it has an extremely good defensive capabilities. The walls, I think, were about 90 feet high. They were several feet thick, and they were about 17 miles long. I believe I read, going all the way around. And so they had moats, and which is water that was in between the walls. They had an inner wall and an outer wall. They had so many defenses for this city that it was quite impressive, and it would be extremely hard to take this city. But uh, he had a lot of confidence in this, because while this army was gathering around, he is having this party, and he is having a good time here with everyone. But this all changed. His demeanor, his you might say his outlook, it completely changed when he suddenly sees this hand appear out of nowhere and write on the wall. And it says that if you read its description, it says that he was greatly alarmed. It says that his color changed. It says that his limbs gave way and his knees knocked together. This man was scared, and he was scared. He was scared pretty badly. We use another phrase sometimes to say they're scared stiff. This man, he wasn't really scared stiff because he was shaking, because he was afraid of what this was. Because one of the things that he had decided to do during this party was that he was going to call and have all the vessels of the temple that had been taken from that defeat of Jerusalem. And when they raided the temple, they took all the vessels that were contained within. And so he ordered them to be brought, and he wanted to use them in order to conduct his feast, which was kind of a way in which they use these things. It was kind of a way in which they could demonstrate their victory, demonstrate their power, and how um, and kind of celebrate their victories of the past while celebrating the present as well. And so they're doing these things. But when he realizes what's happening, this is something that really really alarms him. Sometimes when somebody is scared, they sometimes they go pale, or they go white. And I think this is what happens here when it says that his color changed. And he was someone he was pretty scared when he saw this. And so what he does is he goes out and he calls all of these all of his wise people, all of his astrologers, all the Chaldeans, and the enchanters and the magicians, and the wise people that, of his court, and he wants them to interpret what this has said, because this hand wrote something on there on the wall, and he wanted to find out what it meant. And so he calls for these people, but yet they had no clue. They had no idea what it was. And there's some different theories about why they couldn't interpret this. Some think that God just clouded their mind, or clouded their judgment. In this case, where they couldn't figure this out. Some think that this was written in Hebrew, and so this was why Daniel was the only one who was able to read it. We're not sure, but we know the king couldn't understand this, and we know these wise people who couldn't understand this either. And so they were at a pretty, he was in a pretty desperate situation until, if you go down further, down through, I think down through verses 10 and down to about verse 12, we find out that the queen, comes in, and she comes in, and she says, "Well, have you talked to Daniel? Have you? There is a man who is wise, a man who can solve. The phrase that she uses is, he's got excellent spirit and knowledge. He's understanding to interpret dreams. He can explain riddles and solve problems." That's how Daniel was described, and so Belshazzar, the king, he says, "Well, get him in here." Basically, he says, "Call Daniel in here. I want him to look at, what this is." And so when you get down to verses 13 down to about the end of the chapter, we find that Daniel, he comes in, and he interprets this, and he interprets this writing, on the wall. And he gives the king, the meaning, that he sought. And if you go down to I think verse, let's see here. Let's see. Yeah, in verse 24, we find here that Daniel gives the specific interpretation, of this. And the king, he promises a bunch of gifts, a bunch of riches to anyone who can interpret this. And he promises a cloak of purple, a gold chain. He offers them to be the third ruler in the kingdom. If you look down in verse 29, it says this is what Daniel got when he successfully interpreted this handwriting. And it's interesting when you look at the history of this time. There's a reason why he offered Daniel the third ruler in the kingdom. If you remember, this was something that was offered to Joseph when he interpreted the dream of Pharaoh. And Joseph was offered the second place in the kingdom. Pharaoh said, only myself will be above you, but you will be the second most powerful man in the kingdom, because Joseph successfully interpreted their dream and saved them from that disaster. But Belshazzar here is actually not the real king. There's actually another king by the name of I think it's Novicius. I know I'm not pronouncing that right, but he was the actual king, but he had turned over a lot of the actual day-to-day ruling. He had turned that over to his son Belshazzar a couple of years before, and so he is actually not even in Babylon at this time. And so Belshazzar can't give he can't give Daniel the second most second ruler in the kingdom, because that's him. That's who he is. So he has to offer him the third. But this is what the interpretation was. It says that the writing was inscribed Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. And he says the interpretation of the matter. Mene means God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. This was the message that God had delivered to Belshazzar. And it wasn't a good one from Belshazzar's perspective, because the first part it says that that God he has numbered the days of your kingdom and he's brought it to an end, meaning God has numbered, he has put a number to the amount of days that you're going to be in charge, that you're going to be in power, and it's fixing to come to an end. He's fixing to close the book on your reign of Belshazzar, and it's you only have so much time left. And then the next part with Tekel, it says that you have been weighed in the balances and have been found wanting. You have been found light. God looked at Belshazzar, he weighed him in the balances of judgment, and he ended up being being liked. He'd been found wanting. He didn't measure up to what he needed to do. And there were several reasons for this, as we'll see in here in just a bit. And then Perez, he says that your kingdom is going to be divided and given to the Medes and the Persians, which is what is about to fix to happen. In just a matter of hours, from these events. The Medes and the Persians are going to take over, the city of Babylon. But he's given this interpretation of this handwriting, and it's something that, like I said, he didn't want to hear, but I mean he wanted to hear it, but it was a positive message for him. And Daniel, he wasn't all too gentle with the messages that he brought. If you take a look up at let's see here, up in verse 22. And then if you look through from verses 17 down to 22, Daniel actually recalls what happened to Belshazzar's predecessor, to Nebuchadnezzar. If you remember the story of how Nebuchadnezzar went up on his roof and he looked out at all of his kingdom and he said, look at this kingdom that I have built. Look at all that I have amassed. Look at all the wealth, all the power that I have built. And God, he said, don't you know that, I'm the one who's behind this? Don't you know that I have given you what you needed in order to build this kingdom? And so Nebuchadnezzar was humbled, and he was made to go out like an animal and eat, of the grass of the field. He was, humiliated, as a king because he wouldn't humble himself, before God. Because he was so prideful that he couldn't give credit to where credit was due. He couldn't give credit to God where it was needed. And because of that, he was punished. And Daniel, he recounts this story here from verses 17 and down. And this would be something that this wouldn't be new information to Belshazzar. He would have known this. He would have known that this story. He would have known exactly why what happened to him in this case. And Daniel says, you knew this. You knew the story, and yet you chose to act the way that you did. You chose to act this way and dishonor God by what you're doing. And that's just something that is not going to stand. You have been judged and you've been found to be guilty. It's good to have Beth Chapman Foster. It's good to have you here. I hope that things are going well over your way. We appreciate you stopping by. It's good to see you. But he's told that he's found to be wanting in this case. You see. And this is something that is true when we think about ourselves, and even when we even think about the what we do as Christians. We know that we're not called to be perfect people because we can't be perfect. That's something that is impossible for us. And no matter how hard you try, you cannot be a perfect person. That is an impossibility. The whole reason why Jesus had to go to the cross was to redeem mankind. Not just a little bit of mankind, not just a few of mankind, but all of mankind, because they had fallen into sin, because they had committed these acts of sin, and they had to be redeemed. And so we know that we can't be perfect, but what we can do is learn from our mistakes. What we can do is we can learn from the times in which we know that we messed up. We know that we have committed sin. And we can look at these examples that come before us. We can look at these things that have gone on before us, and we can use those in order to better ourselves, in order to keep ourselves hold ourselves to a better standard of righteousness. If you're someone that is struggling with something, if it's something in particular, or if it's something that you can't seem to shake, we're not expecting you to be perfect, but what are you doing in order to guard yourself from that particular sin? What are you doing to try to better your defense against that sin? What are you doing in order to protect yourself from falling into that same trap again? Like I said, we know that we're going to make mistakes, but we need to learn from those mistakes that we made, and we need to use that knowledge in order to better ourselves, in order to be more faithful, to God. It could be, that could manifest itself in many different ways, whether it be the people that you're around, or the places that you go, or the things that you do. There's a lot of things that we can do that can help us to fight against those weaknesses that we have. But we need to not follow the example of Belshazzar and fall into the same thing that our predecessors have done, or that we have done in the past. But we need to learn from those things so that we can better ourselves. Daniel, he says, you knew exactly what happened to Nebuchadnezzar, and yet you still did the exact same thing, and you have mocked God with using these temple vessels in order to throw your big party, and this is not going to stand. And so that's why he is given this message here, and he's told that the kingdom is going to be divided among the Medes and the Persians. And so we know that we must learn from our mistakes, and we also need to be someone who is willing to not make the same mistake that Belshazzar did, in being someone who did not give credit to God when he needed to. He was someone who, just like Nebuchadnezzar, he was someone who kind of attributed his own wealth, his own pleasure, to himself, and he just wanted to celebrate all the good things that he had, and yet he didn't think of the one who actually blessed him, who actually looked after him, with the goodness that he had. And so his pride was something, and his ability to attribute things of God to something else, was something that was his downfall. Because that's one thing that all across the Bible that we see that God does not like, that he is not pleased with, is when somebody takes something that he has done, and takes something that he has created, and attributes it to an idol, or attributes it to something else, whether it be themselves, or an idol. God, he never looks kindly upon that. Last week we took a look at Moses, striking the rock. And what was God's biggest complaint against Moses for that? He said, you didn't make me holy among the people. Instead, you kind of lifted yourself up and said, basically saying, I'm providing you this water. And so we always need to be careful that we don't attribute what God has given us either to our own self or to something else, because we know that God is never pleased with that. But God is someone who's due all of the honor and all of the glory and all of the thanksgiving for those blessings that we have. It's certainly something that we have to be mindful of. And we also know, and one thing that I think we can understand also, is that we have to be careful to not be prideful like these two men were as well. But in verse 29 and down through 30, at the end of the story, it says, then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed with purple. A chain of gold was put around his neck, and a proclamation was made about him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar the Chaldean king was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. And so Daniel is given, he's given this promotion, and he's given this, purple robe, and he's given this gold chain, and they make a proclamation that he's the third ruler in the kingdom. But this promotion would only last about a couple hours, because pretty soon, the Medes and the Persians would invade the city, and Belshazzar would be killed. And so Daniel only had that promotion for a very, very short time. And he knew this. That's why he told Belshazzar to keep your gifts, keep your rich things, because I don't want them, because he knew what was going to happen. And when you look at what happens to this city, as he said, Babylon was famous for its defense, for its mighty fortifications. But what Darius would do was he would divert the Euphrates River into a nearby swamp, which lowered the water level significantly, so that they could go under the river gate and into the area in between the outer wall and the inner wall. And what is fascinating, and whether it was by God or whether it was by a sabotage, that they still had to get through the inner wall. They still had to get through the inner gates once they went under. Once they went through the river, but those gates were left open. They were unlocked, and so they were able to go through there and capture the city. And so the Belshazzar would not see the next day. He would be killed by this army. And Daniel, he would go on in order to be served under this new regime. The Medes and the Persians would recognize the value that Daniel had, and he would serve under them. But this would be the end of Belshazzar, and he would not have another chance in order to learn from this mistake, because this would be the last one that he made. And so it's interesting to look at the story and see what it has to say. And so we just need to be careful, like we said, to not make those same mistakes that Belshazzar made. We know that we are going to be called into account. We are going to be called into account for what we have used our time on this earth for, what we have used the blessings that God has given us for. And we will one day be at the judgment seat of Christ, and we will be given that judgment for ourselves. Not for what anyone else has done, not for what our preacher has done, or for what our parents have done, or what our friends have done. It'll be what we have done, and we're going to have to face that judgment. And are we going to be someone who is like Belshazzar? Are we going to be found to be wanting? Are we going to be found to be light? Or is God going to look at us and say, well done, good and faithful servant? Come in and receive that promise. That decision is up to us. We have a decision to make, whether we're going to follow God or whether we're not going to, whether we're going to chase after the things of this world. And that's only a decision that we can make, and it's something that we have to look at as being a Christian. But I think that's going to be it for tonight. And as we take a look at this chapter 5 of Daniel and this interesting book, we may look at a few more stories here in Daniel. I think I always enjoy going back to Daniel. I think it's a great book in the Old Testament, and I look forward to coming back to it for some future lessons. But until then, we will be back here next Thursday night for another edition of the Midweek Bible Study every Thursday night at 7 o'clock. On here and on our YouTube page. And so I hope you can check us out then. We'd love to have you, love to see you. And as always, we know that if you have any questions or anything, please feel free to get that to us. We would love to talk to you about those things. But until then, we hope that you have a wonderful night. We hope that your week goes good, and we hope that you go out and glorify God in everything that you do. We'll see you next time.